All right, we're live. We'll wait for Vin to join. How you doing today, Corey?
Doing pretty good.
Good.
Long day. Really long day.
We'll just have to hope that this recording works. Looks like I got plenty of space, so we shouldn't run out of space either.
Alright, sweet.
Our guest today, I guess we'll get something out of the way here. So our guest today is Vin Armani. So he's the creator of CoinText and also has a podcast called the Vin Armani Show, which he does some really, really interesting conversations, a lot of cool interviews that I've seen him do. I try to catch it every week. I think you do too, right, Corey?
Yeah, I try to tune in. He has some pretty interesting stuff to say. I like how the first hour of his episode is usually like him just talking about some kind of topic going on in the cryptocurrency space. Normally, Bitcoin Cash related. And then the second hour, he brings on a guest, and usually it's pretty interesting interviews that he's had because he's brought people outside of crypto before.
Yeah.
Check.
Hey, Vin. How's it going?
Hold on. I need to fix my audio here. And then, let's see. Which one is that on? 5? Maybe? Hello?
Hello. Can you hear us?
Hey,
Oh, hey,
you hear us?
you're there, but I'm not hearing you. Give me 1 second to figure this the hell out. How about now?
Hello.
Yes, now I can hear you. I got you.
All right.
Perfect.
Vin, thank you for coming on. We're recording.
You're recording now?
We are. Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
All
Yeah,
right.
sure.
Thanks for coming on. We're excited to talk to you. We kind of were starting to give a little intro about who you were.
Okay.
But maybe we thought we could just start for anyone who doesn't know who you are, and it'd be a shame if no one has used CoinText but is listening to our podcast at this point.
Probably, yeah.
So you're Vin. How'd you get into Bitcoin? What started you in this space in general?
So for about 8 years, if people Google my name, it's gonna if they Google Vin Armani, my 6th season spent on a Showtime show called Gigolos is gonna come up, and that was a reality show about straight male escorts in Vegas. My background's as a software developer, but I just happened to meet the guy who ended up being my agent in I guess this was probably early 2010. And, I was in great shape, was playing beach volleyball competitively and, good conversationalist and whatever. And he was like, hey, dude, I just started this agency. You're a single guy. If attractive, rich women wanted to take you out on dates and pay you thousands of dollars to do it, is that cool with you? And I was like, yeah, that sounds really good, man. I think I could do that. So I did that for a few years, and then Showtime decided that they wanted to make a show about the agency, and they cast me as one of the guys. So that was just this weird thing where I kind of took a little bit of a break from my professional software development career and did that. I was still doing stuff on the side. About 2012, that put me in an all-cash business is basically what happened. And so I was in an all-cash business with a significant amount of money and trying to figure out, okay, what am I through a lot of different options.
Uh,
10 or 2011, a development team on the first Bitcoin client, and was like, hey, check this out. Don't you think it's cool? And there was really nothing to do with it or whatever. So around 2012, late 2012, this was December, I decided, let me check back into this thing. Went and bought my first Bitcoins in Vegas to hand off local Bitcoins. And they were $15 at the time. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is an option for, storing some of my money in the future, right? I was just exploring options. So I got between $1,000, $1,500, somewhere in that range. And I was giving them out to people, showing people. I was like, isn't this cool? At that time, I even to do a little storyline, hey, I'll be the first gigolo to ever take Bitcoin. And they're like, what the hell is a Bitcoin? What are you talking about? This electronic money? And I was like, it's going to be huge. Believe me, trust me, it's going to be big. And so in 2013, when it went to $1,000, I sold everything that I had. I was like, this is stupid. This doesn't even make any sense. Why on earth? And then in 2014, I had kind of a little bit of a lull, and I just peeked back into it, got some more, started holding a little bit more, and then started developing. And so when the show ended, I had a couple of other businesses that I was still taking care of, but I was like, let me get into this a little bit more. Started doing my show, the Vin Armani Show, and that has morphed now into kind of a crypto show, which wasn't expected at all. But in the first episode, I'm a huge libertarian, and even in the first episode, I said, look, there's 3 technologies that are going to lead to liberty. First and foremost, Bitcoin. Second is aquaponics, and third is mesh networks. So those are 3 things that we've dealt with on the show in the past year and a half. But obviously, I love crypto. I had been developing, and then when the prices got really crazy on Bitcoin, the mining fees, when they started to go up, the things that I was working on, the prototypes that I had developed, just basically stopped working. The economics of it was just off, and because a lot of it was micropayments, smaller stuff. Thinking about ideas like my company CoinText, and then when the fork happened and Bitcoin Cash had been around for a little while, my business partner Jeff Paul was like, "Dude, you really need to look back into Bitcoin Cash." And I did. I spent maybe an afternoon switching my libraries over, and then in November started developing. And one of the first projects, so I've got this suite of tools that I've been developing myself for now 4 years. And so the first little project that we put together was CoinText. It was something I had thought about for a really long time, changing the UI, or at least experimenting with other UIs, because we've got a lot of fiat UIs, right? So you've got paper cash, you've got coins, you've got your bank, you've got PayPal, you've got all these different things, and we've got pretty much, as it stands, one crypto UI that everybody's used. And it's you look at the white paper, the word QR code does not exist in there. So it's like, this was already something that was a kind of it was a solution looking for a problem, the QR code. People have been showing me these things since about 2006, and there was no use for them. And so besides what they were invented for, which is supply chain management. So, it's been about exploring other things. It's an SMS wallet for if those people who are, I'm sure everybody who's checking out your show has used CoinText, but it's a BCH SMS wallet. And one of the things about it is that because just the economics of that particular business requires that fees be really, really low. It requires that for a good UX, for the UX to work the way that we've got it working, which is really smooth, that as soon as you get money, you can send it off to somebody else or do something with it immediately. It's just like handing somebody $1. That aspect of it has to have zero confirmation capability. So there at the time, as I was looking around, to the best of my knowledge, BCH was the only thing that could do it. So certainly BTC couldn't. So that's kind of where we stand right now. CoinText is expanding. We're closing on a seed round of funding right now. It was an experience that made me really, really want to start thinking about doing some securitization, see what that looks like on the blockchain, because it's an absolute nightmare if people haven't been through jumping through the hoops to get venture capital and make it all legal and all of that. It's really expensive, and it's a pain in the ass, and I'm already a libertarian who doesn't like a lot of states, so that rubbed me the wrong way. But so yeah, it's we're expanding. We're planning on being in 54 countries by the end of 2018, and it'll be like 5.1 billion people in population. So yeah, we're trying to hit those 4 billion people with SMS enabled phones. So that's it.
Awesome. We mentioned before you came on, but I definitely would recommend everyone check out your show. We watch it pretty much every week. Great,
awesome.
Great
Appreciate
stuff.
that.
And we have plugged CoinText before, but I do want to commend you because it is undeniably the best way to onboard new people. I've noticed that. I think it's much easier to text someone money than it is to get them to download an application that they don't understand. You used to have to then explain to them, okay, this is what a private key is, don't lose this, and write down these 12 words and whatever else, and people do not usually like to do that either. So I definitely commend you for CoinText. I know we've both used it quite a bit, but it's undeniably the best way to onboard new people.
Glad you guys like it. There's a lot more coming, I think. So yeah, it's going to be the merchant stuff. We want to make it just as easy for the merchants, and that's the thing I'm most excited about that we're rolling out this year. It'll be the lack of friction and the ease of use that you're talking about with just the onboarding the average consumer, we're going to do the same thing with merchants. So that's something that just has not happened yet, to the point where you'll be able to onboard a merchant literally while you're standing in line. That's what I'm looking for, is that you're like, oh, do you take Bitcoin? No. Okay, well, here's boom. And they've got a point of sale like within 5 seconds. So that's what we're shooting for.
Awesome. We are looking forward to it. So I guess we can jump in here, right? So we invited you on. You talked specifically about zero confirmation, right? So obviously zero confirmation is something very important to you. When you use CoinText, I've noticed I can bounce it from phone to phone, no problem, right? So you're obviously using zero confirmation today. This past week, something that you did talk about on your show on Monday, there was, I guess, a spittle, or I don't know what word you'd want to call it, but quite a long Twitter thread.
Right.
Around the Miners' Choice Initiative, around quite a few different things, right? I guess, mostly me, maybe I was one of the main people responded to on Twitter there. I am a very big proponent of the Miners' Choice Initiative, and I know that you're not necessarily against it. Well, I don't know. I don't want to speak for you. I guess I don't know if you're against it for it, whatever, but I think you see some problems in maybe the way it could be applied. And I noticed, at least, I don't think Twitter is a great medium. I've noticed, at least, because one thing I did want to mention as a good historical example, when I saw your tweets about Eat BCH, for example, I was like, huh. And we talked about it a little bit. I was like, well, I think I see where he's coming from. It was a little unclear. I didn't necessarily agree or disagree with you. Then I noticed on your show, listening to your show, and I was like, yeah, you're 100% right about that. I don't want to get too into it right now, but the general idea, right, of being wary of donating to just a picture, for example, right?
Right.
So I thought we could clarify this, because I think there's a lot of people actually on, I don't want to say your side. I don't think it's necessarily their sides here. Although, unfortunately, it kind of seems like that's the way it's played out. Is now there are these two sides, maybe. Unfortunately, like some of it seems to be revolving around personalities. But I thought we could talk about just the. Okay, so you, as a business, you're a developer, business owner, what concerns you about the recent? Specifically, we can talk about both of them, but I guess. What concerns you specifically about the CoinGeek miners initiatives? And you can talk about either one if you want. And why are you concerned about that with respect to zero confirmation?
Okay. So first off, let's start this way in terms of being in support or not in support. When I first started developing on BTC, you could get transactions confirmed with zero fee. And that was, I believe, that is a plus. And clearly, low fees is the exact reason why CoinText is on BCH. And if low fees are good, no fees are better, right? So for me, for my own personal self-interest, I'm all for, it would be great for our business. And so this is in a vacuum, right? This is saying, what would be good for me in terms of my own self-interest? Zero fees absolutely would be great for me. I can use the network for free for CoinText. That's amazing. That increases my bottom line because we're charging a fee for the transaction. That means I can charge the same fee because the market is clearly holding that, but then I don't have to pass any off to the miners. Great. Fantastic. No problem. So the other part of Miners' Choice is removing the dust limit. And removing the dust limit, for me, I don't like. There have been some people who are protocol devs who have communicated with me privately saying, but they refuse to tell me what the problem with taking out the dust limit is, right? And so I have nothing to go on in that regard. So I'm just like, okay, remove the dust limit, fine. They're telling me there's problems. We probably shouldn't elucidate it in public or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't tell me anything. So I'm not going to have an opinion one way or the other about the dust limit, right? Reducing the dust limit, okay, if that's what we want to do. The issue, though, that I have is part of what secures Bitcoin is most of it is not technological, actually. Most of it is economic. And as with all security, really, most security is about making it too expensive or too risky for a thief to attempt to. It should cost the thief more to get the bounty than the bounty is worth. Now, whether that's in personal risk, whatever it is, however he looks at it, whether it's in money invested, time invested, risk to his person, legal risk, financial risk, whatever it is, reputational risk, it should be what he gets. If what he gets by stealing or committing whatever the crime is less reward than the cost of him doing it, you're safe. You're safe, except for complete and utter lunatics. And usually complete and utter lunatics are not the type of people who can acquire the skills to do the type of attacks that we're talking about in this case, right? So what we have at the current point, although we have very, very low fees on the network, and this particular fee, it happens to just be the hard-coded fee that's been in core for a very, very long time, 1,000 Satoshi per kilobyte, which is 1 Satoshi per byte. That's been in core for a long time. It was moved over into ABC, and at this point, there were a few variations in it, but at this point, the miners have all pretty much, both in core and in Bitcoin Cash, the miners have just let that sit there. And for now, as a whole, it's just been like, okay, this is what we're going to do. It's kind of a cultural norm at this point, right? So we're reaching the point now where we have enough of a critical mass where we're starting to get cultural norming of things, just like we talked about QR codes, right? Like that's a cultural norm. People associate Bitcoin with QR codes, but there is no intrinsic connection between Bitcoin and QR codes. None.
Right.
None. But yet you know that everybody associates it with that. So it's just a cultural norm, right? Mm-hmm. Cultural norms are very, very useful. Very useful. So what we've got going on here is a suggestion of changing a cultural norm. Now, there is clearly an argument to be made. And the argument is, well, it used to be that there was no fee. And I know this personally because I was developing and my projects were relying upon there being no fee in 2014, that I could get things pass through. Fine. There also was not an antagonistic other side at that time. The market was different, right? There was no value to be gained by somebody just straight up attacking the Bitcoin network. Not enough people even knew about it. The people who knew about it were all sympathetic to the cause of Bitcoin. The people who were using it were all pro Bitcoin at that time. There was nobody would get any social value from attacking the chain. You understand what I'm saying?
Right. So maybe we can we'll break it down. We'll start with just the zero fee. Okay. So what is the attack vector? What is the concern if we allow transactions to have zero fee in Bitcoin Cash today? What would?
That's actually a very important question. So the problem is not zero fee. Let's first get that out of the way. Okay. The problem is variable fees between miners. So the reason why zero comp works, and this is why to show this, I went and did a video, and if people want to go onto my YouTube, youtube.com/Vin Armani, I did a video actually showing what this exploit looks like and how easy and non-technical it is when you have variable miner fees. I did it using Dash, but close to the metal, Dash and BCH are indistinguishable. Sure. The difference in the code that it takes to communicate with one or the other is trivial. It's trivial. They're close to the metal, they're the same. On the governance level and all this other stuff, they're very, very different. But really tight, close to the metal, they're the same. So this particular thing, if you just had variable miner fees, it works the same way. So basically what it is that when you have variable miner fees, if I send, so the miner fee it's a floor. It's a floor at which there's a filter. So if it's 1 Satoshi per byte, which it is right now, and I broadcast to the network, a miner fee that's any less than 1 Satoshi per byte, if I send half a Satoshi per byte, it is just rejected outright by the entire network, right? But if a miner were to change, so let's say that right now Antpool was to change to half a Satoshi per byte as their minimum. I could broadcast half a Satoshi per byte to the network. If I broadcasted it to an Antpool friendly node, that the first node would at least take it, all of Antpool's mempools would have this transaction, but nobody else would.
Right.
Nobody else would, right? Which then means that I can broadcast the same transaction, even sending it back to myself, at 1 Satoshi per byte. And all the rest of the network will accept it and stick it in their mempool. So now what we've got is we've got in Antpool, so Antpool is controlling what, about 15% of the network or something like that?
Sure.
Antpool has one transaction, spending an input. The rest of the network, the other 85%, has another transaction, spending the same input, perhaps spending it back to myself. So this is a double spend. So now it's a crapshoot of which one of those is going to go through.
Sure.
So 15% of the time, it'll be the one with no fee or with the lower fee. And 85% of the time, it'll be the other. So that's a very, very high chance of double spend. And the more variable it is across the network, so if that was to go 50-50, I could double spend half the time. In other words, I could walk into a merchant, I could pay them the money. If they're looking at the same set of nodes that I'm looking at, they say, okay, it's good. Zero conf, it's good as it stands right now. I can literally walk out. I could wait 3-4 minutes, send the next transaction, sending it back to myself, and it would literally vanish out of existence. The merchant would go back to look and there would be nothing there, and I would have mined it right back to myself. So, that's the concern.
Sure. So I got to see two things. Number one clarification is actually today you can actually broadcast a 1/10 of a Satoshi per byte transaction, and for example, Bitcoin.com will mine it. So there's even someone I think tweeted us a transaction ID. You could broadcast a 0.1 Satoshi per byte transaction. It would sit, you'd wait until Bitcoin.com mined a block. It would get included in that block, right? So what you're saying,
I mean, I would love to see that. I know that was the case several months ago. I believe it's called doublespend.cash, where they had done this, and it was kind of an unknown node on Bitcoin.com. But as of now, because I know those guys, and they have been, that is no longer the case. So that was the case. I mean, I would love to see what the date on it is. I know that they had brought this up as an issue. They were raising the alarm on this issue. So that was the case. Doublespend.cash, people can go and see that this actually did happen. As far as they have said now, it's not happening anymore.
Okay. I will send it to you because it is happening. I know today Bitcoin.com is mining lower than 1 Satoshi per byte. So, but I agree with you that the doublespend.cash website definitely shows what you're talking about in action, right? Where, and I think I did see there's an example of the same output but different fees. There was also, I think, even one example where it was a successful double spend in the respective. It went to one output and then the other transaction went to another output. So that would be definitely a successful double spend where you tricked one output for another, right?
Sure. But we should say, even if it is going on today, this is an outlier case. So if somebody has found that, that's fine. And so what needs to be clear is that the threat here is what is not necessarily that it can be mined. The threat is what node is the merchant looking at. That's also a key in this case, right? So in order for a merchant, because zero conf is not really a technical thing. Zero conf is more of an economic thing. It's more of a conceptual idea. It's just, what is the level of risk of a double spend happening? And if you have just a little bit of variation and you have a level of strict nodes and they're querying the major nodes and the major block explorers, for instance, aren't taking them, because you can do it if you've got a full node. You can do a lot more than you can do with, say, a mobile wallet, right? An SPV wallet. So it's really all about, do we have a network that over time is highly susceptible to double spends? And if you have replaced by fee, right? So BTC, you really can't do zero conf just because it's baked in, and you don't want to push that risk off onto the merchant. Chances are the merchant is non-technical, right? That's just, anybody new that's being onboarded as a merchant is going to be non-technical. That's going to be one of the things. So it's like, there's a lot of places where this can fall apart, right? There's a lot of points of failure. It can fall apart on the merchant not putting in the correct settings into a wallet. It can fall off on the wallet itself not being one that the merchant should be using, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At this point, it's very secure. It's very secure in terms of zero conf. And a network over time, because there will be many more forks of Bitcoin, and over time, it's going to be that this is my belief, but it's a deeply held belief, that the network which provides the easiest, most foolproof zero confirmation is going to be the network that over time will be able to outcompete all the others, because it will be the easiest for app developers to compete in the point of sale market, which will mean the best point of sales, which will mean necessarily the most merchants onboarded to it.
I completely agree. And where I think the reason why I wanted to have this discussion, and I want to be clear, this is not supposed to be some debate or anything like that, because I think this is very interesting. I think that we can learn quite a bit as to how Bitcoin works. But then, on the other hand, the reason why I'm a big proponent of the CoinGeek, the two of the miner initiatives, we only covered one of them. The other one specifically, and I think this is one that you did have a problem with, was that they essentially issued a threat, is what I would call it. They issued a threat. Yeah. This was at the Satoshi's Vision conference, and they said that if you include a double spend transaction, and they were very vague. I'm not saying they weren't vague about this whatsoever. It was just a press release put on their website that did kind of just use buzzwords, and it essentially said, if you include a double spend transaction in your block, we will orphan that block, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the time, a lot of people, even Peter Eisen himself, actually at the Satoshi's Vision conference, had a problem with it. He was essentially saying, I think that would be nice, but there's no possible way it can be done without a change to the protocol. Now, I'm a big proponent of what they're doing, because I think all of the potential problems, for example, of different mempools acting across mining nodes, things like that, can be solved through this system of co-opetition, I guess is what I would call it, right? So if I'm CoinGeek, and let's just say for argument's sake, if I'm CoinGeek and I announce this initiative and I get Roger on board, maybe I get Jihan on board, and maybe now you have maybe 55% of the mining hash rate agreeing to do this, right? And I'm a miner, and let's take the scenario you just outlined, where let's say maybe 75% of the network agrees to take transactions with less than 1 Satoshi per byte fees, and let's say the other 25% keep it the way it is, right? So now you do have a circumstance where there are varying mempools across nodes, right? If that happens, what would be the best way? The point I'm trying to make here, okay, is if I want to double spend with the attack vector that you just described, right, where maybe I'm broadcasting specific nodes, I think that actually one aspect that we should touch on is the nature of the network also kind of alleviates this problem in general, where if the network actually, if nodes themselves are incentivized to broadcast transactions,
mm-hmm.
and if you're a merchant, for example, and you're trying, now I understand your point, right? If I'm a merchant and I do ping every node in the network, and half the nodes don't actually visibly have this transaction, they don't know it even exists, then you do have a circumstance there where maybe the merchant can become confused, maybe they are susceptible to some kind of double spend attack, okay? But what better way to create a robust network where no double spends are included in blocks, where you can have these free transactions? The point I'm trying to make, why would we develop this into the system when it can be done completely through competing miners? Where if you have 55% of the network saying, if you included two things, number one, we're going to include we're going to include zero fee transactions, and number two, if you include a double spend in a block, we're going to orphan it. Okay, so if you do include, for example, a double spend in a block because you weren't looking for maybe, let's say, 1% of transactions based on coinage, right? Maybe you missed those in your mempool. Now you're incentivizing miners to be better. You're incentivizing miners to compete. You're incentivizing miners to invest in one extra hard drive to keep maybe a gigabyte of data in the mempool, for example, right? I think that the actual competition of miners can create a more robust chain through these two initiatives. I actually think that the double spend orphaning initiative solves this problem that you're talking about. Now, the question becomes, and I'm not gonna mince words about this. The problem is these things are very vague. These things have been very vague, so everyone is kind of like, well, are you even doing this today? Probably not. If double spend.cash does have some transactions right in the past month or 2 months, so clearly they didn't implement it the day of Satoshi's vision, and whether that's because they don't have more than 50%, I don't know. Whether it's because they're waiting for other nodes to implement something like XT has, where you can scan the mempool for double spends, I don't know, right? But I guess I'm not saying this is what you were arguing for, but in general, I think this was the point that at least we were trying to make, or I was trying to make, where I think the free market of mining actually solves these problems. I don't think I think allowing.
Well, of course it does. We're not arguing. I see where the misunderstanding is.
Sure.
Here's where the misunderstanding is. Do you sell anything or take your salary in cryptocurrency currently?
I buy things. We were going to start selling shirts, but yeah.
Okay. So you buy things. Like, what percentage of your necessities, like food, rent, and all of that, would you say on a monthly basis you purchase using cryptocurrency?
Minimal. One restaurant in my city that I go to.
One restaurant in your city.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. So I think that you are absolutely right in the sense that look, I'm a Misesian, right? I'm a free marketeer. The very best way to get the absolute best product is to have the maximum competition in the market. The absolute best way is you're going to have a lot of competition. You're going to have a lot of experimentation. Some things are going to go right. Some things are going to go wrong. But over the long term, that is absolutely the best way to get the strongest, most stable, and most robust product, right? Absolutely. There's no question about that. I think that history plays that out. Economics plays that out. So you're absolutely right. These are two initiatives that do add in a layer ability that will lead to stability. It forces the issue, right? It takes what we're talking about as a cultural norm. It forces the instability to see, like, well, no, what is the market going to do? Like, what will the market hold in this case? Like, let's have the stability come from the actual, as you say, what did you call it? Co-opetition. Let's have that actually be what makes it stable. 100% correct. Neither one of us are in disagreement on that.
Okay.
My point in this is that if that network is doing that thing, right? If it's going through those evolutionary changes that are incredibly volatile, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about you need a level of volatility first, right? So what we're talking about is making the network less stable than it is at this very moment, right? Hold on. What you're discussing, it's either going to be less stable than it is, or it's going to be as stable as it is. If it's as stable as it is, then these initiatives are going to do nothing. We're talking about moving fees around that are set at the moment. Now, there's nothing to say that it might not fall apart. We're talking about changing things, and we're talking about an orphan block initiative that, as of right now, doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So you're talking about adding in variables to a network. But by adding those variables, 100% I agree. What you get at the end is you get a better network. But that may mean a fork, because not everybody may not go. We know that this may mean a fork, because you have, right? So we know this. We've had it with BTC.
I disagree. I completely disagree.
Go ahead.
Why would CoinGeek fork themselves off from the network? What does CoinGeek gain from forking themselves off the network, doing something that doesn't have majority consensus, that doesn't... Look, if I'm CoinGeek, I'm not going to do something that even in the short term would devalue the chain that I'm working on. So why would I add instability to the network
Well, how do you know if you're CoinGeek? How do you know what will and will? If you know what will and will not increase the value of the chain, then what's the point of having the free market? Because you don't know. That's the whole thing. You don't know if your actions are going to increase the value or decrease the value of your product. You don't know.
Right. But you
try to not do it. Right? You're making your best effort not to, because you have every incentive, but businesses make terrible decisions with the best of intentions because their principals believe that it's going to increase their value and it puts them out of business. They make those decisions all the time. That's the nature of business. That's the whole entire reason that we have the free market.
So if you but okay, but this is the root of the Byzantine general's problem. This is what Bitcoin is rooted in. Why would I make a decision if we're talking specifically about this problem that we're talking about? Okay, zero fee, varying mempools. CoinGeek would only want to act on this initiative if if they knew for certain that over 50% of the network was going to join them. Why would they do it if they weren't entirely sure that over 50% of the network was going to join?
You have to announce it. You have to announce it before the 50% are going to join. As of right now, unless you have some other information that there have been some agreements made, I have been talking with people as well, and I have had no such assurances. No one has told me that, oh yeah, there's 50% of the hash power is behind this. If you guys have that information, I'd love to know.
And I'm not saying that either of us know that information. I don't think we have to know that information, because my point being, if let's just say hypothetically, 70% of the network, let's just say, Roger, Jihan, whoever else, it ends up with 70%. They decide tomorrow we're going to start doing this, and you're a 30% miner. Let's say you alone are the other 30%, right? You find a block that includes a transaction that has a double spend in respect to you missed that there was a 0.1 Satoshi byte, that was broadcast, right? You find the block, you broadcast it, and you're orphaned tomorrow. Because what are you going to do?
Well, this is not a problem if the majority do it. It doesn't create a fork because the miners naturally follow the chain with the most proof of work, unless there has been a limiter put in that says, here are the blacklisted blocks. Right now, there is no such thing as a blacklisted block limiter, which would stop a miner from following the chain with the most proof of work. That's only a problem if you have, let's say, 30%, right? Because what you have in that case is you have 30% of the miners following a completely different chain, because it only takes 2 times with the blocks. You get one block, it orphans. Okay, that's normal, right? Now they're not. Now you've still got the equal these two. All right. Sure. Then you've got the next block. If that one is mined by the non-orphaners, so you've got 70%, and it's on that. Now you have the chain with the most proof of work. In general, the way that it's set up now, everybody would just follow that. Everybody would follow along with that. But now you're putting in this blacklist limiter. And so that means that 30%, you now have a chain split. You have a chain split at that point. And the 30% guys now have 100% of this chain with no relay protection. And the 70% guys who are following the chain without the orphan block initiative now have 100% of that with no relay protection, replay protection. And so now you've got a situation where that's an unstable network. That's a network we haven't seen before. We haven't seen a fork with no replay protection. We haven't seen that.
Sure. But I think the root of the issue is, why would a 30% miner continue? What you're sorry? Did you say in that circumstance who is the 30%? Who's the 70%? Who's doing
30% is CoinGeek.
Okay. Why would CoinGeek continue to mine on their 30% chain if no one else is agreeing to follow their initiative?
Well, no, this is what I'm saying. CoinGeek doesn't have 30%, right? So if there was a coalition of people, so if you have CoinGeek, Roger, and let's say via BTC, that's going to give you about 35%.
Sure.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, at the last look, because I went to go and look. That's who it says right now. If they were to do it, they would have a new chain that was basically it's the same way that BTC and BCH forked. It would literally be the same, but it would be not forking because of consensus rule changes, and not forking because of replay protection, but forking because basically they couldn't follow the other chain. There was a blacklist. Their software just could not follow this other chain. And so now you have two chains. Here's the thing. That's actually not a bad situation to be in. You've got your own fork of BCH. If I'm CoinGeek, that's a hell of a move. That is a Machiavellian move if I'm CoinGeek. Because now I've got, in that scenario, if it was 30% and CoinGeek's got 10, now I've got 30% of the hash power on this new chain. And maybe that chain is the one that actually becomes more popular. And maybe that chain is the one that's queried more often. And maybe it's a way to get Jihan to go off into the woods. Perhaps. There is some advantage when you combine these two together. It is a method for creating a fork.
I don't disagree that, yes, you can theoretically end up with a situation where two chains emerge and CoinGeek is on one, but what makes CoinGeek more money? That situation. Now, here's the thing. If they wholeheartedly believe, similar to BTC and BCH, if they wholeheartedly believe that the roadmap of that 70% chain is bad for Bitcoin, and they believe that what they're doing can create a much better Bitcoin in the long run, and therefore they're gonna take the loss, for example, or the short-term loss, because they think this is.
Why is it a loss? Why would it be a loss?
What is the value of their chain, of their 30% chain? What is the value? Then gets determined by usage. It gets determined by. There's a lot that would go into determine the value, right?
Well, let's say that it started out worth 30% of what the BCH chain is worth now.
Sure.
Okay, but remember, it's a fork. So they retain still all of their UTXOs on the other chain. Yep. So all of their holdings on the other chain, they still have. They have holdings on a new chain. It's very similar to the situation that major holders were in when BTC and BCH split. The people who were on the BCH side, who were sympathetic to the fork and were sympathetic to BCH, but didn't sell their BTC, benefited from BTC going up to 20,000, and then they could have sold then and bought more BCH or sold out to cash, whatever they wanted. That situation, CoinGeek is already holding a significant amount. If we're to believe Craig, he's already holding a significant amount of BCH. He didn't lose it. He doesn't lose it. Ostensibly, you actually gain double potentially, but certainly more. If you were holding UTXOs on BTC at the time of the fork in the summer of 2017, overall, those are worth more when you combine the price of BTC and BCH right now.
But you're assuming that in this hypothetical situation, the value not only splits, but it continues to remain the same. You're saying that look what happened if you're CoinGeek. I understand what you're saying. I get it, right? But if CoinGeek instead were to continue mining, let's say theoretically, the 30% chain dies in 6 months. Okay? Let's say it becomes irrelevant in 6 months. CoinGeek would have made more money sticking with the majority chain, right?
Why?
They'd be mining blocks. They would be getting a block reward.
But what percentage of they have 10% of the hash power right now?
Sure. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Right. So, but if your bet is that, hey, what we have planned for Bitcoin is actually going to make the network way better than it is now. If this is what you wholeheartedly believe, then the scenario you're talking about the chain falling apart, that's not even in your calculation, because you're like, no, it's all in our hands. We can take it, and actually this is going to be the chain that's got more. You're making a calculated risk in that case.
Of course. Yeah.
But you're still hedged. You're actually nicely hedged on the other chain still. Because even if it falls off, you can always re-add your hash power. You still have your UTXOs. You don't lose everything. You're taking a shot. You're taking a shot at having 30% hash power on the better chain, as opposed to 10% hash power on the exact chain that you have now.
Two things. One, I think this is actually a dead end. I don't think that this is actually, or number one, I don't think it's a realistic scenario because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that if I'm CoinGeek, I'm going to, unless it is a situation like BTC and BCH, where you actually believe this is so dire, like the activation of SegWit, that it requires us to completely fork off. If you believe that it's actually that dire, what you're trying to do, then sure, I understand what you're saying, that now you're talking about two forks. You're assuming the first chain doesn't lose value because of that. Why would the first chain continue to increase in value if, I understand historically that very irrationally is what just happened with BTC and BCH, right?
Well, but why is that? Why would you say that it's irrational considering that was the first time it had ever happened?
Sure.
Why is that not the norm?
That's fair. Tether, right? I mean, we just had a report. Yeah, it was clearly.
But we're not talking about a real legitimate fork with real legitimate players. The only time that it's ever happened, I mean, we're sitting here. The only time it's ever happened, both chains continued off, and ostensibly, both of their value is more than much more than the value of what they both came from.
That's fair, and you're right. And I guess I would ask one question: do you think that Bitcoin itself would be more valuable today if there was no chain split and Bitcoin was essentially what Bitcoin Cash is today?
No, I'm saying it was a good thing. Looked at in the long term, it was absolutely a positive thing. And so what I want to do is I want to frame where I'm at. I think we've gotten into like what the hypothetical could be,
sure,
right? And you're right. It is, in some ways, it is kind of a dead end, and it's really not the most important thing in this case. The most important thing is, regardless of whether that's happening, I mean, what we just described is not just a stable network sitting there humming along. There's activity, there's growth, there's evolution. In the long term, that's going to be better for Bitcoin. No doubt. No doubt. However, businesses like my own and myself, where I moved to New Hampshire because of the actual use of cryptocurrency. I uprooted my entire life to come here. We're basing our business here because I can go to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I can walk down the street and there's Bitcoin accepted and Dash accepted on every door on Main Street. I can walk down and I can use it there. I can go to farmers markets. I just bought like my whole, I've got local organic eggs and meat and milk and vegetables and all of that, all paid for in cryptocurrency, right? Can get gas in cryptocurrency, can do all of these things. I'm here to, and my goal, and you guys know this if you listen to the show, is to onboard people and to bring them on to use this as real currency in real day-to-day life. And that's the reason why I'm behind Bitcoin Cash. Now, to do that, the network so it's basically two divergent self-interests, right? You could say that it's perhaps short-term self-interest or short to medium-term self-interest and long-term self-interest. So it's like, if what I want to say, what network would I want to be on 20 years from now? If I'm going to start this business that I'm talking about 20 years from now, I'm like, dude, go to war inside Bitcoin. Go to economic war. Miners, get it done now, as quickly as possible, because the more brutal the fight, the more volatile the situation, over the long term, the better the product is going to be. Competition leads to the better product. However, for me, and this is why I brought it up, it was to say, look, what do you want? What do you want? And there's no community. So specifically, that was why my question was to Craig, right? This like, look, as a miner, where are you at? Are you wanting to go through the motions that it's going to take right now, basically to rip the scab off, if you will, and to just go at it? And if there's volatility, if there's pain, whatever it is that what you're going after? Or are you going after stability of the network so that we on this side, the app developers, the merchants, the consumers, so that we have the most consistent experience? If the answer is, listen, we want to go and we want to get Bitcoin as robust, as secure, as powerful as possible and to do that is going to require intense competition, then I'm going to say, okay, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you. But I have investors who are investing on a yearly basis. And so my outlook and the outlook of most businesses is going to be quarterly to yearly. And so I'm looking at, well, which network do I need to be investing in the 1 year, 2 year, 3 years? Do I need to be building on top of? Because the last thing I want to do is not have hedged, not have diversified in that regard. You know, I've thrown all in on BCH because I believe in it. I believe in the people involved. I've believed in the community up until very recently because I don't think there's a lot of clear thinking going on. And so I've thrown in. And, you know, back in April, I said, I put up a tweet saying, convince me to just keep CoinText on BCH. And people blew up at me. And I was like, okay, I'll keep it on. But if I'm going to keep it on, then I'm expecting that this network is going to stay stable. I'm expecting that there's not going to be forks. Are you guys going to commit to that? Because that's how you're going to keep people on. Not as an investor, not as I have a self-interest that very, very few people have. There are very, very few app developers out there, even less point of sale.
So number one, because this is something that I saw leveraged against you, and I want to make it clear. I do not think by any means you are a malicious actor in this regard. Okay? I do not. I think that was very unfair that a lot of people assume that you have malicious intent behind what you're saying. I completely understand. I agree with you. I think that you have 100% every right to be concerned.
Back.
Sorry.
Is he back?
Oh, am I good?
Man.
Am I good?
I don't know if it's.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
Are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, you guys went. I heard a lot of weird noises in my ear. So
Yeah, we cut out when you said you were talking about you thought that it was unfair that I was labeled as a malicious actor, and then you cut out.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So the point I'm trying to get across is that I don't. I think you have every right to act in your own self-interest. Right. You have every right to. Is this good for my business? Is it good for my investors? I think the fundamental disagreement I actually have is that I actually don't think that this creates an unstable chain in the short term. And I just don't think that, because I think we've been conditioned to think about Bitcoin in a completely in a wrong way. I don't actually think, and the reason why it hasn't happened, the reason why CoinGeek hasn't forked themselves off to 12% of the network or 30% of the network, whatever else, is because to them, and this is, and again, I know we can't predict what would have happened. We don't have a crystal ball, but I think overall Bitcoin would be today, the overall market cap of Bitcoin, whether you include that in Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, would be worth more money, would be used more if Bitcoin was Bitcoin Cash. And so what I'm trying to say by saying that, and again, I'm not trying to argue that point. I think whatever, but in the overall perspective, CoinGeek is incentivized to act in a way that gives them the most amount of value, that puts them on the chain with the most amount of value. And if I'm CoinGeek, I have more of an interest in saying this is what we're going to do because this has a better outcome. I think we would probably agree there that the
better outcome for whom?
For the chain, for Bitcoin. If
well, why if you're CoinGeek, why wouldn't it be the best outcome for CoinGeek?
It's both. If Bitcoin Cash is their chain that they're mining, and Bitcoin Cash grows in value, that is a selfish act in a way on their own because they gain more value out of what they're mining. So I think that's one of the beauties of Bitcoin, right? If I act selfishly for the good of the net, my acting selfishly is good for the network. If the network remains good, the network grows in value. Therefore, I am exponentially increasing my wealth by acting selfishly as a miner, right?
Well, let me ask you this: if CoinGeek has 10%, let's say CoinGeek has 10% right now.
Okay. In
a scenario where you have a very stable chain, and you have a sort of you have a detente between which in some ways you do, in some ways you don't, because they are competing with the biggest manufacturer of mining hardware, who has a distinct advantage in that when they come out with a new product, they mine with it first. So they get this massive boost in hash power, and then they sell it off. So if you're CoinGeek and you're sitting in this scenario and you've got 10% of the network hash power, the chain grows in value, that's fine, and you do what it takes for it to grow in value, but your market share is 10%. And ostensibly, it could get less because you're dealing with somebody who can actually who has been already disruptive in the market because they can release new products that no one else has, and they've got secret weapons. So in this war, you're in a detente, but these guys can come out with a secret weapon at any time and basically destroy the detente in the way that Bitcoin is made to be. If you're CoinGeek, why would you keep that situation as it is? How if you were looking to increase market share, how would you go about? Well, let me just ask you that. You're CoinGeek. How would you increase market share, which is more than 10% of hash power, sitting in the situation that I just described?
I would say if I'm trying to take the most risk adverse and most beneficial route, I would do what Satoshi outlines, and I would act honestly, and I would buy hash rate. I think that if you otherwise,
you're Chain as being a risk averse company.
Sorry.
Do you see N-Chain? Do you see N-Chain and CoinGeek as being a risk averse company?
That is an interesting question. I don't think that they are I think that they are I think all miners are risk adverse. Actually, I do think that. I think that's
of the miners. Would you say that CoinGeek and N-Chain are of the most risk averse, or would you say that they are the most? I guess that would be risk friendly. That they are the most willing to take risks and upend the apple cart, as it were, as opposed to other miners. Where would you put them on that spectrum of miners?
I would, of course, put them closer to the risk side than any of the other miners.
So if we're going to talk about the scenario, let's talk about you being CoinGeek, as CoinGeek is, which is the more risky. So we don't need to bring up the risk-averse side. Let's bring up, if you were CoinGeek in the situation I outlined, and you are friendly to risk, and you're looking to make more profit, which as a miner means more. Did we lose him again? Oh no, there you are.
Oh, sorry, I got you.
Yeah. Well, so what would you do in that case? Being friendly to risk.
It would be in my interest if I wanted to implement a change. It would be in my better interest to either build the tool out for other miners to do what I want to do. Okay. It would be in my interest to make sure what I was doing wasn't going to cause myself to fork off from the network. It would be in my interest instead to make sure I had the majority of the chain, or the majority of the nodes agreeing to do what I'm about to do. It would be in my interest to make it as risk adverse as possible, my actions that I'm about to do, right? And I would say that in the case of something like a double spend initiative, or in the case of zero fees, I honestly do not care about the other 45% of the network once I get the 55. Once I get the 55%.
That's right.
Yes. And
absolutely, that's right.
But if I'm creating a better product than the 45%, the 45%...
Well, it doesn't matter. If you have 55%, it doesn't matter whether your product is better or worse. It just matters that you have more proof of work. That's how Bitcoin works.
Right. But
your product
you're using,
got more proof of work.
But you're using the circumstance where 45 would then fork off their network. If I'm the 45, I would probably rather take the extra time to start monitoring for double spends, which is really a quite trivial task as a miner, honestly, right? So I would probably rather just start... Sorry?
Yeah, no, the orphan block thing is only an issue if it's a minority that's doing it. Because if it's already 55, let's say that 55% of the miners agree to orphan blocks, there's no way, if I'm in the minority, that I'm not going to do that. There's no way. Like, I have to, because the chain with the most proof of work is anybody who's just following the chain with the most proof of work. My own mining rigs are going to follow that chain. The only thing that's going to happen, so I don't change anything. My own rigs start following the 55% chain over time, even if I'm not orphaning blocks. I'm just getting my blocks. If there's an orphan in them, I'm just getting my blocks re-orphaned by the larger chain. So I'm just not able to add on to the larger chain. So yeah, if you're in the majority, you can do this all day long.
So if I'm in the minority, why would I gamble? Why would I gamble and create my own fork, hope that it doesn't devalue the majority chain as well? Because like you said, I do hold the UTXO, the majority chain already, right? Why would I gamble and try and implement this initiative? What is it? I don't agree with you that it's actually in my interest to create this minority chain.
It already happened. It already happened.
But I think it's not.
Your show is called Beach Boys, BCH. It already happened. I don't know. What do you mean? You can't see it? It already happened.
But I think this is a conflation of two things. There's a difference between we are about to do something that literally destroys Bitcoin forever. Therefore, we are going to make a minority chain. SegWit network. You don't think moving Bitcoin onto a mesh network destroys Bitcoin? Moving all Bitcoin transactions, SegWit itself. That's what the miners decided. The miners decided SegWit itself was an existential threat to the future of Bitcoin. Only after
the same miners that are mining BCH are mining SegWit.
Some of them,
except for CoinGeek. Which are the ones that aren't?
Well, I would say that. Okay, you're talking about the pools themselves. Sure.
Yeah.
CoinGeek is BCH only. Bitcoin.com allows people. I think they pay out in BCH, but
they mine both.
Yep.
They mine both.
Yeah, but sorry, where is that in the context of what we're talking about? I understand that.
So where it is in the context is the question that you had asked was, why is it in my interest to fork off of a successful chain as opposed to just doing that which will keep me on the chain? And my answer to you is that forks happen because the person who is trying to do the work has a different vision for what should be happening on the chain than the people who are ostensibly in charge of the chain. Now, in the case of BTC BCH, that was Blockstream. But that's not the case with BCH. The case with BCH is it's Antpool, it's Bitmain. That unknown 24% is and has always been Bitmain, and everybody knows it. And so when you add in Bitmain and Antpool and the agreeing, other little bit, you've got the majority. It's always been that way. That's been the propaganda against it, and it's been true. And I've not had a problem with that because I do believe that those guys are all about the status quo. I do believe that they mine every chain, they hedge all of their behavior is the behavior of someone with a long-term outlook that views this as they're very risk averse, right? Just the fact that they hedge, right? They mine Dash, they mine Litecoin, they mine BTC and BCH, even though Jihan's like, BTC is just a short-term profit play. But at least the fact that he's like, but we're going to play the short-term profit play. It's like, okay, we view this as an investment. We're capitalists. We understand we're going to hedge. We're going to do these things. CoinGeek isn't doing that. That's not the behavior of someone who is risk averse, someone who is looking for stability in their investments, right? Well, if you hedge, hedging is the behavior of someone looking for stability in investments. That's people who hedge, that's what they do. People who are all in, those are people who are not risk averse. Those are people who are like, let's do it. We're going to make a big bet and we're going to go for it.
Well, and this is an interesting idea because I would actually argue, and I understand, obviously, we're biased. I would argue the risk-averse thing would be to mine Bitcoin Cash with all of my hash rate. I honestly believe that. I do not believe, and I understand that is a completely biased, whatever, perspective.
I'm not sure that it's biased. It's just, I don't know that anyone who's a professional investor would say that the most risk-averse strategy is to not hedge. I don't know. I mean, I think it's. I don't know what to say, but you can believe what you want to believe about what would be risk-averse.
Today, if you had the option to buy $1,000 of Bitcoin Cash or buy $500 of BTC and $500 of BCH, what would you do?
Oh, $1,000. But $1,000 is a bet. That's like I'll put down $1,000 on the tables in Vegas. I'll bet with $1,000.
All right, your life savings. Would you split it?
Yeah, I'm hedging. I would split it between 20 coins.
Sure. And I think that is maybe the root. That is the root. You called it. I think you called yourself a coin agnostic, right? Is that what you said? Am I making that up?
I'm coin agnostic because what I am into is my strategy, my investment strategy is I'm an entrepreneur. I am a software developer. I build software, and the software that I'm building is because what I'm betting on is that a variant of Bitcoin, the concept of Bitcoin, is the new money. That's what I'm betting on. And that money is going to have to act like cash. And so I'm going to only build my products on any coin that has sub 1 cent fees so that it's psychologically free, because I can't give you half a penny. So that's psychologically free. That has zero comp. And that has stable zero comp, because that means that the maximum number of developers are going to get involved, because it takes a lot less code to be basically you anything that you can leverage the network to do your work for you, as opposed to you doing that work. That's always going to be the most attractive to any entrepreneur, because it's less work, less coders, less points of failure, the whole nine. You want to leverage the network to do that work instead of you. So that's the zero comp. And the third thing is that it has a vibrant community of people, because with CoinText, I actually need people to go out and use the product. So it doesn't matter how good my product is. If there's no community, forget about it. So those are the three things. Any coin that has those three things, I'm willing to develop on it. Right now, for me, it's only BCH and Dash. But I do believe that there will be others. So that's really what I'm going through, is I'm trying to figure out, and that was what started this off in my initial question to Craig, is like, I'm pinging these miners. I mean, I know Roger. You know what I mean? Like, I could just call the dude. I don't know as much. I don't know the Chinese guys as well. But like, Craig and I are on a first name basis too. He sends me pictures of his house and his car, and we talk about things that, or at least we did, privately. So it's like, this is me pinging these guys to be like, hey, I'm building on top of this network that you guys happen to be the backbone of. I've got this investment. Like, I have to be asking, like, what is the situation here? Because I've got to be months out in front of it. If I need to hedge and put myself on another network, then that's what I need to do. But I need to ping these guys. If they come back to me like, Vin, don't worry. Do not worry, dude. We are going to make this thing so stable. You have nothing to worry about. Don't worry. I would believe that. If Craig told me that, I believe it. If Roger told me that, I believe it. That has not been what has come back. As a matter of fact, when I've asked questions about whether or not things will be stable, particularly from Craig, the impression that I've gotten is that the answer is things are already unstable.
Sure. I see. Look, I see your perspective. I think maybe I would say, number one, and I think I mentioned this on Twitter, there's no obligation for, and let me hold up. You absolutely have every right as an app developer to say, whoa. Are we going to do this? And if this is going to happen, how will this affect my application? Right?
Right.
I think maybe the root of it is that do you think that the honest miners grow the longest chain? Do you think that statement, this is really a very fundamental issue that I think has gotten Craig in a lot of trouble, a lot of debates or arguments. Do you think that mining itself, in the case of the selfish mining paper that came out, Emin Gunsider said specifically, Bitcoin is not incentives compatible. Do you believe that? Or do you think, I guess, where is your stance on that not basic concept, I guess it's not really basic, but do you believe that the simple statement of the honest miners grow the longest chain and therefore Bitcoin is incentives compatible, do you agree with that or not?
The longest chain is grown by the set of miners that combined whatever their particular action is the majority, is over 51%. That's what grows the longest chain. I don't know about, like, this isn't about honest, dishonest. This isn't about good or bad. It's just about pure numbers. And it's like, if every miner has no blacklisting of blocks, so in other words, if every miner is operating in the way that Satoshi describes, then the chain with the most proof of work is what they follow. If they're all communicating with each other, and you've got 2 blocks found at the same time, the next one that comes up that's built on whichever block that's built on top of, that's what they follow. The other one's orphaned. It's not about what the intention is. But if you have a block blacklist situation, like we're talking about with this orphan block initiative, then, I mean, miners can follow the not longest chain. So you have a situation, I mean, we've already described how it happens. So it's like, longest chain, not longest chain. It's like, sure, well, it's the longest chain until it's the longest chain that I can follow. Sure. The miners will always follow the longest chain that they can follow. Does that necessarily mean that that's the longest chain that they're all communicating about? It absolutely doesn't if you've got this blacklist situation going on.
Can you actually clarify the block blacklist? So what exactly do you mean by that in respect to, are you saying that it would just become all miners? Because as far as I understand, the block blacklist would be a result of, I'm going to look at the transactions in the block that you broadcast to the network. If there's a double spend, is that what you mean by blacklist, or do you actually mean like a miner themselves is blacklisted from producing?
Well, no. So what I'm describing is this. If you've got the orphan block initiative, it's just saying it's taking the next logical technical step about what you have to do to make this initiative happen, right? So if you've got the orphan block and you orphan a block, then it's nice to the block. The next time a block is mined, if it's mined, let's say it's mined by the same person. Let's say in this case it's Antpool, right? Let's say Antpool mines this block, it's orphaned by this group that's doing the orphaning. Then let's say Antpool mines, so now it's like, that's not there. They're still following the longest chain. Each one of them still following the longest chain that they can follow because this one's been orphaned. Then Ant block mines the next one, right? And let's say there's no double spend in that one, but it's built on top of the double spend one. If you don't have some scenario that's flagging that block that's now 2 down to say, no, that was an orphan block, so we can't follow anything that's built on top of an orphan block. If you don't have that built into the protocol, then all of the miners are just going to go and start following. They're just going to start following that second block, and now you're right back to where you started. The orphaning does you no good. You have to have a scenario. The orphaning does you no good. All you do is lose money. All you do is lose money.
Who loses money?
The person who's not including the block. Because that second block is mine, and that second block is, they look and they're like, okay, that's fine. That's a valid block with no double spend. Now that chain has the most proof of work. So now they're like, well, we follow the chain with the most proof of work. So they just start following that chain. So now they go and they download those 2 blocks. Those 2 blocks are propagated out to them, and now you're right back in the same situation. What was gained by orphaning that block in the first place when you just re-added it back to your blockchain as soon as the next block came up? So you have to, in order for that to have any teeth, you're going to have to say, no, if you build on top of that orphan block, we're still not going to follow your chain. And in that case, you forked. It's over.
Sure, but that doesn't require a protocol change. That would just be, really, at the root of that would be incentivizing miners not to build on top of that block in fear that what they're doing, that the work that they're doing is wasting, right?
Well, when I say it's a protocol change because right now in the protocol, there is no function that would enable you to do that. For instance, with settings. You couldn't just, there is no setting within Bitcoin ABC that would allow you to do this. It's a change in the overall consensus rules at that point. Right now, there is no such thing as, if there's a double spend, we will orphan the block. That's a protocol change.
Not quite. No. If I run Bitcoin, let's say I had 30% of the hash rate, I don't need a protocol change to run XT, for example, monitor the block you sent me for double spends, and choose whether or not to reject it. That doesn't require any kind of protocol change.
That isn't in XT, at least not that I know of. Is that functionality in XT right now?
The functionality to monitor for double spends would be. My choice as a miner to include it in the chain is just something I would do as a miner. That's my free choice to do so, correct?
Okay, you can, if you want to not call it a protocol change, that's perfectly fine. And it's actually not. In this case, it's not important whether or not it is a protocol change. What's important is that it's a chain split, and it's something that does not. It is a function that no miner is currently doing at this moment.
Sure.
So it is a change to the overall rules within the network, even if it's just a change to what one miner is doing.
Sure.
Even if it's just you making that change, it is an overall change to the rules in the network, in that it is a change to your rules as to which chain you are following at any given time. It's adding in a new variable.
Sure. I think I don't actually think there's a ton of necessarily disagreement. I think the actual disagreement is that I don't think it's an interesting question. I think it's an interesting debate. I'd be curious to hear what other people have to say about it. Is what you're really getting at is that you think that it would be profitable for CoinGeek or whoever else to create the minority chain. And
was it profitable? Was it profitable for Roger Ver to? He didn't create it, but was it? Has it been profitable? Has the BCH fork been profitable for Roger, for Jihan, and for Craig?
I would say two things. One, BCH is one of many Bitcoin forks that actually that was true for, right?
Well, but that doesn't really answer the question.
Okay, so let me answer the question then as a number two. Is I actually do 100% believe that if Bitcoin hadn't forked, if Bitcoin, and look, this is not something that we could quantify probably, but I do wholeheartedly believe that Bitcoin wouldn't have hit $20,000 and dropped to now $6,000 in a way because all it turns into is a speculative asset when it's governed like that. So I actually think if Bitcoin was allowed, sure.
But that wasn't the question, though. That wasn't the question. The question was, I'll repeat the question. The question was, has the fact that BCH is its own chain and has forked, has that been profitable for Roger Ver, Craig Wright, and Jihan Wu?
Sure, but is it more profitable than if Bitcoin had remained one chain that was actually being used that was usable as cash? That's the question that you have to also balance.
It's hard to know, right? It's hard to know.
Yeah.
But, and I think Roger would probably say that he would have much rather that it stayed, right? But there's no question that certainly nChain and certainly CoinGeek are in a much better situation, or at least regardless, because we can't know what had happened, but what we can know is that they're in a positive situation. It was positive for them, and the outlook for the future is positive. And so what that says is that doing a fork is not going to happen unless it is positive for someone. And that's the case whether the fork succeeds or whether the fork fails, right? So what's his name? Johnny Jang, the guy who did Bitcoin Gold, he didn't go through all of that because he believed that it was going to lose him a ton of money. He went through that because he believed that he was going to make money doing it. That's the reason that you do a fork. You don't do a fork like, I'm going to do this fork and it's going to fail and it's going to be terrible, but I'm going to do it anyway. No, of course not. That's not what you do. I mean, you may be running it as some sort of a scam where you've got like an ICO and doing some weird, that's always possible, right? But the fork doesn't happen. And that's just economics. Like, it's necessarily not going to happen unless someone thinks it's in their best interest. And so necessarily it says if the fork happens, that means it's in somebody's self-interest. And so then it's to say, is there a scenario under which this fork might be in someone's self-interest? I just laid out what that scenario could be. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. That doesn't mean that that's what these guys are thinking. It doesn't. And I'm not accusing anyone. And that's why I started this whole thing trying to ask questions of someone I know on a first name, face-to-face basis to try to get some answers about, like, what's going on.
Sure. Yeah. No problem with that. I personally have no problem with that whatsoever, right? I think again, I think now the root of what we're talking about is it in your self-interest to continue to grow BCH as one chain or to fork it off yourself? I think it's an interesting question. I would argue the former. I could maybe see how you could argue the latter. I think that if CoinGeek or nChain or whoever else thinks that their minority chain will be more valuable, I think yes, it would be in their self-interest to do so. I don't think that actually right now it's in their self-interest at all to fork BCH. And I think it would be a very, very, very dire situation, like it was with the BTC BCH fork, before it would come to a head like that. I don't think that would just be done willy-nilly as some short-term profit play. And you want to know why? Because if they did that, it's just as likely that the other 80% of the network would not allow them to mine back on the majority chain. They could make their own initiative that says we are not going to allow CoinGeek to mine on this chain and orphan every block that comes from CoinGeek. That is also something.
If they know it's CoinGeek,
but they can.
It could be in the unknown pool.
It could, but they can monitor for. Sure, that's fine. I understand what you're saying, that you could theoretically, you can mask your where your node is and all that kind of stuff, but I think it's much better to introduce. Well, I think we can maybe leave it. I know we have about 9 minutes left. We put in your calendar here. I think.
Well, let me ask you this, because I think that this is an interesting and important question, and it's more of a general question about what you think. Do you think that BCH is going to eventually fork in a contentious way, like what happened with BTC, or do you think that will not happen with BCH? And if you do think that it may be a possibility at some point, and there's obviously nobody can know, what would be your prediction of the time frame in which it would happen, like in terms of numbers of months, years, whatever? What do you think in that regard, in terms of the chances of BCH forking in a way like a Bitcoin forked before into BTC and BCH?
I think the maybe more appropriate question would be, what would be the time frame someone would try and introduce something that so breaks the core of Bitcoin that it would require that? And I think,
however, whatever the reason is,
I don't see that happening anytime in the next 6 months at all. I don't see that happening. It's hard, crypto moves very quickly, so obviously we don't know what it's going to look like in 6 months anyway. But
what time frame would you say that it would be? Say 30% chance. What would your time frame be for 30%? Just a prediction. I'm just interested. I'm just curious.
That's fine. Well, it would have to take. I think, for example, if I think it's very important to people like Craig, people probably like Calvin, who really want a ton of, for example, like gambling businesses running on Bitcoin. If someone said we're not going to actually remove the block size limit, I think it's completely likely in November they would take that opportunity to say, all right, well, screw you, we're just going to completely remove it. Obviously, the removal of the 32 meg requires much more work than it did to take it from 1 to 8, for example, right?
So you could see 6 months from now, if Calvin and Craig truly, if there was something that was happening that Calvin and Craig truly felt that it was in, you say dire, but I mean, whether it's positive or negative, that truly in their best self-interest, that the best absolute thing, it was a must for them to do some change to either keep it the same because somebody else wanted to change it, or that they didn't want to increase the block size, whatever, that you think that they would be willing to do a fork in that time.
I think it's in their best. I think it's in their best interest to have one global chain growing value. I don't think it's in their best interest at all to fork away. I think it would literally take something like someone trying to implement a protocol breaking, a Bitcoin breaking change, where they would do that. I don't actually think that they would do it as some kind of short-term profit play. I don't think. I do not actually see that remote. I think with all the arguments that happen in Bitcoin Cash land, everything else, I do not see that happening. I don't think it's actually in their best interest at all to make a minority chain. It would take something completely breaking of Bitcoin, like for example SegWit, for that to happen? I don't. I guess what do you think? What do you think the chance of that happening is? For example, in November, what would you put the chances of that happening at?
I don't know November. I think it's 100% within the next 2 years. Within the next 2 years, 100%. I don't know who would do it, but my understanding of what Bitcoin is culturally and just the nature of, I mean, I do believe it's history repeating itself. I've said many times, and people may think I'm crazy, but it's like I've studied enough about it. I do believe that Bitcoin is an analog of Christianity, and I've studied the history of Christianity and the schisms and the way that they lay out and the religious fervor that people have. I mean, we're sitting here having this conversation, and you just said, I mean, you're not even really using Bitcoin for cash. You know what I mean? I don't know what you're holding, but it's like the fact that you're this interested in something that you don't really even use, you know what I mean, significantly, is pretty indicative of like, wow, this is as much a cultural movement as it is a technology at all. And I do believe that the BTC BCH fork was a cultural phenomenon. I don't really believe that it had anything. I believe it had to do with personalities. I don't really believe that it had to do with changes to the technology. It had to do more with a vision of, well, the technology led to where could we take this thing, but it really had to do with vision, and it had to do with personalities. It became very clear to me. I wish this video was out there somewhere, but the few of us who were at Anarchapulco in February 2017 and saw Roger Ver from the audience go in on Tone Vays, I think at that time it was pretty clear that it was a giant schism. So I mean, within 2 years, 100%.
I think you're actually right. I think it's much easier to have a multitude of forks if Bitcoin isn't being used actively. I think it was very easy to fork Bitcoin when you had Steam removing it from acceptance. I think it's much easier to fork something when there isn't actual usage going on daily, right?
Absolutely.
So I think you are right there for sure. Look, I think this is an interesting conversation. I think a question around where does the value come from? Can you create value with forks? I think obviously,
who knows? We don't know.
The past year would be indicative that perhaps that is possible, and maybe you could do it over and over again. I don't know. I do think, I would hope, and I think that I think it's Craig's interest to make everyone use Bitcoin Cash globally. I hope so too. I hope so too. And we'll see what happens, I suppose.
We'll see.
But let's hope that this doesn't become a giant. I do not hope that this is a. I don't think it is too contentious of an issue. I think as long as everyone's happy, as long as you know that double spends can't occur and that zero confirmation is still safe, everyone's happy. And I think people like you yourself as an application developer are owed that assurance. So I have no problem. I just want to make
I'm not owed anything. I want to first off say that I'm not owed an assurance. I don't expect an assurance. I'm a free marketeer. All I'm doing is collecting data. If you don't give me an assurance that but you do want me to be assured, that's a bad strategy, right? If it's in your best interest for me to be assured and you don't give me an assurance, that's not a very good strategy. But if it either doesn't matter or it's not in your self-interest for me to be assured, not assuring me is a good strategy. So I just have to take it as I see what's happening in the market. I just have to take the data that comes into me, and then I make a decision myself. You know what I mean? I'm not owed anything from anybody.
Sure, that's well put. And the question now becomes, and I think this would be the two. We can just restate the two positions here. Sure. It would be, you are either assured that by the competitive mining market, or you're not. Right. I think I do not think you have a malicious opinion about this whatsoever. I think it's completely reasonable to think, yes, CoinGeek and nChain, it's in their interest to fork a minority chain and no replay protection, all that stuff. I think that's I
at least have to prepare for the eventuality, right? Because I think were I sitting in your chair, I think that my view on what the risks were would be considerably different. My view on what the risks are now is where mine is, because I've got standing behind me a whole bunch of investors. I've got a bank full of money that needs to not just be spent but grown, and I have the financial well-being of myself and my family constantly in the back of my head, and what happens affects all of those things for me, and it affects them in the next year and the next 2 years. Do I think that the Bitcoin, a variant of Bitcoin, will be what is the money for the world in 20 years? Absolutely. And as soon as, if a lot of risk is introduced, I hope that I will have hedged, and I hope that if I do step off of the chain, I hope that I step back on at the right time to take advantage of it. It's just I'm just in a different place, Everybody in the market's got different self-interest.
And I think the last thing I would say, and if this didn't come across, I think a miner is just as it's in a miner's self-interest as well, not to have a chain full of double spends and unreliable zero confirmation. I don't think
I believe that too. I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, Vin, this is a good conversation. We really appreciate you hopping on here.
Yeah, thank you for having me
on. We keep up the show. You're doing a great job with the show, and CoinText, we're looking forward to see what comes next. I know that you've been hinting there might be a few other projects that you might be having coming.
A lot. Yeah, lots. This next year is going to be very, very busy. Now we're able, with this influx of capital, we're able to move super fast. So that's the reason why we were self-funding, but it's much faster when you're able to have that capital foundation underneath you. So it's good.
Great. We'll continue onboarding with CoinText, and
awesome. Appreciate
keep
it.
up the good work. So Vin, thank you very much.
Man.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a
All
good
right.
day.
Later.